evening. It is 4:36 on, bear with me, on Monday, September 12th. I call this meeting of the Clear Creek Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present and that this meeting has been duly called and that its notice has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. No community input, so we will move on to action item A, consider approval of human resource report. Any questions?
Make the motion. You go. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the human resources report as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Seeing no further comment, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your right hand. And that motion carries 5-0. Next, we'll move on to item B, and we have Mrs. Lopez.
Hi. Hi. I started in November 8th. I worked at Fort Bend ISD, so I'm not new to the school district industry. The whole point of doing an internal audit plan, and we do it by risk assessment, is to survey the districts, the key leaders in the district, and we use a numerical system to come up with the highest risks and what those might look like. And so 30 surveys went out in June. Everybody responded. Page 4 in the audit plan is where it goes into detail about the risk assessment. I don't need to go through the whole thing here, but it's really ratings, scores, weighting. We weight things heavier. I go by impact. So technology has a high impact on any company or district just because of cybersecurity alone, but I'm not looking at that. But I'm just giving you an example of how we do it. So we go by impact. We also go by TEA and what they scrutinize. Student data, for example, would be something.
Can you move the microphone a little bit closer? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Might be one of the.
To take it off or take it on? Yeah.
Oh.
Pretend it's like karaoke.
Can you hear me now? All right. So what I was saying is we basically go by ratings.
Online will give you any. It's not
Hey,
for
Jessica,
video feed.
Jessica, it's more for the video feed.
Are we online?
So it doesn't make her louder
You
when
can
she
actually put
talks
it
to
back.
that in this room.
Uh,
You're just gonna need to speak up. You just speak up. So you put the mic back. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not gonna come through here.
Where am I? Okay, as I was saying, the risk assessment process is a summary of weightings, ratings, and then final scores. And employees, there's, some are objective, right? So staff turnover or budgets are objective risks that we look at, and some are more subjective, which could be training and some of the other things like processes like in the example of our yard process that I'm going to be looking at. There's more, you can't really quantify that just yet till you do the audit, right?
And Mrs. Lopez, not to throw you off or anything, and we did receive, your preliminary audit report in our Friday packet, but for maybe those at home, could you explain, and I know you said it just a few minutes ago, but could you explain the breakdown of how, which component comprised what
Yes.
in the risk plan? Because I know it was like, one was 40%, one was,
Yeah, there's two.
Right.
The first one is identification. We try to gain an understanding of the district and all the risks. The source, of course, is the risk survey, interviews, prior audit reports, prior outside agency reports like TEA, if we get any of that. Then we measure the ratings, so like say financial considerations, 30%, system and data, 27% as it came out. And again, a lot of that is impact. We analyzed it once it's done, and that's where it was talking about the auditable units. So the different auditable units would be like the ARG process, but the other category is you write the audit plan and then you schedule and you monitor. Writing the audit program takes the longest because that's where you have to get the most input from everybody and from other sources. On page 5 is where the scores are and the results, okay? So it names the department, it's sorted by risk score, we go by the highest, and we work our way down. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean because you're high risk that you're gonna get chosen for an audit. A lot of things go into this. There could be a lower priority item that's higher priority because it's important to the superintendent or the leadership or to you, the board. I can use the substance abuse program as an example of that. That's on the audit plan. We'll get to it, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. Okay, and that's basically what we were going over there, right there. The risk survey, all the way through to the summary of the survey results. Okay? Is any questions on that? No? All right. So like I said with the graph, and you can see the way the presentation has it, it only brings up a few, but it shows every score for every item that I analyzed. But in the audit plan, you see all of the categories and all of the scores. One got cut off at the bottom. The number's 12.23 for the teacher center. I'm not sure why that got cut off, but it did. Audit plan development. We review the risk graph and we decide, okay, we talk with leadership, we see what their priorities are, their objectives. A lot of times that drives the majority of our decision. And new department head, new principal, when we're talking about campuses and campus audits, or new bookkeepers in that case. And that comes through discussions, and then we decide what to do with that. We review the audits for timing. Now, timing is subjective. It depends on what time of year we're going to audit. Sometimes, like leavers, for example, is one that I was going to do first because we just ended last school year, student leavers. Some audits, though, are better performed in the spring or the fall, and I work with management on that. It's determined the best time to do it, so that they're not, and we don't do, and I did this, I do this always with my audit plans. If something's in transition, you're getting a new system, for example, I was going to do discipline and attendance, but those two things are in transition. They have a task force for attendance, and they're doing things with discipline. So I kept student leavers, but we're going to wait on the other two until they're finished with their work. Then, once you approve the plan, you carry it out. I don't know if I answered all your questions, but one of the audits is Bay Area Alliance Intervention in Substance Abuse, like I said. I think we can all agree that the kids in this country today are not okay, and that's not okay. So through this program and all programs that you see on my audit report, I'm student focused. I'm student focused. I care about each and every one of them. Even though mine is in Cy-Fair School District And yes, I drive that far. The kids here get the same focus from me as he gets at home, and he'd like less of it. Special education, visual and performing arts. I know a lot about special education, the art process. My son was in speech therapy, so I know the ins and outs sort of how that works. It was a few years ago, now he's 17, but it's the admission review and dismissal process and making sure that what's in each student's individual education plan is being executed as put together. Visual and performing arts is consulting agreements and theater receipts. Special education homebound, that's the kids that are confined at home and they have to meet certain criteria. They have to be home for obviously a medical reason. Licensed doctor has to make the decision, and there doesn't have to be, the weeks do not have to be consecutive. So if they're out for 2 weeks, they come back and then they're out again. It doesn't have to be consecutive in order for them to comply with the plan. There's also other things that I do. And if we go to, all right, let's talk about the completed audits from last year, because I kind of skipped ahead a little bit. Some of the audits that were on the audit plan last year didn't get done because of COVID. If you remember, you received 2 COVID audit reports. You got one from Julie Smith and you got one from me. That took about 6 months of the audit plan. We did schools. We definitely did the campuses as we were going along. Things like this, we try very, very hard to stick to the audit plan and get everything done, but sometimes it's impossible. And COVID was impossible. What she completed in the year prior, prior to the year that this ended, was 24 campus activity fund audits is what I call them now. I know they're called bookkeeper audits here. I changed the name to what they really are. And the bookkeepers seem to like that. Safe and secure follow-up. We had a theft at Weber Elementary that she was investigating. The status of that right now is it's in the prosecutor's hand to see if they want to move forward with it. It was skimming of deposits to the amount of $60,000. And it happened over a period of 5 years. That's not okay. And so I have updated the audit program with additional controls that I built in to try and identify some of this before it happens. But it does happen. We don't always catch everything. It doesn't mean that we didn't do our job. It just means that we just didn't catch it. The way school audits are done now is cycle auditing. So 1 every 2 years. I did a campus risk assessment, and I'm about to finish it, where it's again scored. Total revenue, disbursements. I didn't put it in here because it's not finished yet, because I need all the new principals and the new bookkeepers. We've had quite a few. Once I add them, then we'll get started on that. Free and reduced lunch program, purchasing cards, human resources. And then she did 2 campus audits and then 1 COVID audit. I took over November 8th and did 15 campus activity fund audits, the 2nd COVID audit, and transportation ridership, which took me a while to do. So those are do you have any questions on the ones that were completed? Okay, so these are the proposed audits. I believe it's a little bit of a challenge, but I think 23 campus activity fund audits can be done. There are 2 follow-ups. There were 2 schools that need some additional assistance, and I think they have new bookkeepers now, too. We talked about special education, visual and performing arts. Student leavers, this is very important to me. I used to have a PEAMS auditor when I worked at Fort Bend, and we did student discipline, attendance, leavers, and enrollment balancing. So student leavers, for those who don't know what they are withdrawals, transfers, dropouts, or kids that are being homeschooled. And what's important, obviously, to a district is the dropout rate. And you want to manage that. Now, I'm sure, well, I'm not saying I'm sure, COVID, I think a lot of school districts have a higher dropout rate than they normally would because they pulled their kids out and are homeschooling them. I don't know what that is yet, but I will once I audit it. That's one of the most important. PEEMS, I don't have to do a risk assessment to know that PEEMS is the highest risk that we have. And it drives everything. It's student data, it's financial data. It has to be complete and accurate. And I have to say, working with Dustin and his group, they have very good processes in place. They really do. We're going to have a student leaver meeting soon. And they've made a lot of improvements. They get involved with the campuses. I think it's going to be good. I really do. Any questions on that?
Mr.
Do
Bell?
you want to wait until the end to do questions over the whole report, or do we want to?
Oh, okay. No, we
as
can-
we go?
We can wait at the end.
We can wait till the end.
That's
if
the end.
if That's fine.
Oh,
Okay.
that's the end.
Shoot.
There we go.
There you go.
So I guess I'll start with a couple of larger questions and then maybe zero in on some things. I guess my first question is when we vote on this in a week, and it is at the next meeting when we actually will be voting on the audit plan, right?
No, I think it's today. Yeah, it's today.
Okay. Well, so what I don't really see an actual, like, when I think about, like, if you're doing, let me figure out how to say this. It's not really clear to me what the audit is actually looking for in these categories. And so when I think about an audit plan, it would kind of be almost a step-by-step procedure, right? So maybe that wouldn't be publicly divulged, but we would at least be able to see what data sets are you looking for, what exact discrepancies are you trying to find in each of these areas so that we know what the scope of the audit actually is. Because special education is gigantic.
Of course,
And
yes.
there's so much data involved in that, and I mean, I suspect a lot of it is very hard to find. So, I mean, is a special education audit, maybe you look into 10 individual students and follow their process from beginning to end and see if you find any
Yes.
non-compliance?
Yes.
Or-
On page 6 of the slide, which we could go back, but we talk about how we plan and research and do our field work. The way it works for each scope, it has to be a smaller scope because I'm one person, we know this. We'll hone in on how does the process work. So we look at data first. I need data. So for special ed, I'm going to need student data and take a sample from that. And I usually do 10%. And then I'll understand the process as I understand the data, select samples from the 10%, and make sure that that matches what the department is doing and what TEA says they should be doing. That's how the audit process works.
So in this case, so for special education, for instance, you would pull 10% of the special education student population, and then from within that couple hundred, 10% would be a couple hundred probably. So within those, you would choose individuals that maybe are representative.
I would choose all of that's the sample.
Okay.
It would be the 10% would be.
So for a couple hundred samples, you would follow from beginning to end the ARD process and artifacts created from that, and make sure that everything was in compliance with our procedures and TEA regulations.
Exactly.
And so at the end of this, are we going to be provided a comprehensive list of the discrepancies you found? Or,
Oh, yes.
Okay.
In the audit report. And when I say 10%, I don't know how many special ed students we have. It could be 5. I got to keep the scope small and still get to the point, to the highest risks. But yes, you'll get the audit report. And in the audit report, you'll see the discrepancies. I discussed them at the monthly finance meetings. I've met some of you at those meetings. And my approach to auditing is, I'm fair. You know, I understand that sometimes things come up. As long as they haven't broken the law, things happen. Maybe they can't find a document, but they find it later, or I can help them with a certain section of the audit and tease out why whatever I found was a problem. Do you understand? So I don't weaponize my audits. I don't know if anybody wanted to know that, but I'm telling you that.
Oh, yeah, and I understand completely. And I mean, kind of in my professional life, I mean, I'm used to auditing, as I assume a lot of us are. And so when auditors have findings, it's not necessarily a legal issue. It's just an opportunity to improve. But I guess the other question I had is, most of these audit, for the 2022 to 2023 audit areas identified, it seems like only the campus activity funds part is financial. Is that accurate, or are there financial, like we're not looking at purchasing, we're not looking at
Theater receipts for visual and performing arts is going to be financial.
Okay.
Theater receipts, the ticket receipts.
Okay, so that's just basically the ticketing process.
Ticketing
for shows?
process.
Okay.
They'll walk me through it, and then I'll test the process. I document the process, and then I'll test it for the results, yes.
Okay, and then it may be too late for this year, but in subsequent years, is there an opportunity for us as board members to identify areas that are of particular concern to us, that we might want to see audits in the future?
Of course. At Fort Bend, I used to have quarterly audit committee meetings. I know it's done differently here, at their monthly finance committee meetings. We often would, the board president or someone else on the board or the superintendent would say, you know, I know you had this on your audit plan, but we really need to look at this. That happened quite a few times. Like I said, I don't want to say the audit plan is fluid, but it can be. It just depends. But if you go throughout the year and you find something that you want me to look at, then we talk about it.
Okay.
And if it's of higher risk, then we do it. I mean, if you say do it, we'll do it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
Ms. Lopez, thank you for walking through this with us. Just a question for you about the proposed audits that are listed here. If we look across a calendar year or an academic year, do we still have flexibility if, maybe to Mr. Bowen's point, if something else comes up throughout the year that you all identify as something that would be valuable to audit for one reason or another, does it mean that one of these would have to drop off, or do we have bandwidth to do
Possibly.
an additional one or two if we needed to in the year?
Possibly drop off. That's why we put some carry over audits here, because that's what happened because of COVID. Remember, we lost 6 months. Yes, but that's what we would discuss, though. The superintendent and the board make the decision, not me. We would go over the audits and see what your new program you want me to look at, or your new financial process or procedure, and then we talk about how does that fit in against the ones that were approved on the plan. Now, what I did at Fort Bend is we used to do amended audit plans. I don't know that that's done here, but that's what we did. And it was usually every 6 months we would do that. I'm not saying we have to do that here, but that's when this kind of stuff would come up.
Thank you.
And so I was just going to piggyback off that and just suggest, to my fellow board members, if you're looking through, policy, or if you're looking through, financial, that's why those are provided for you, to be able to kind of keep up even if you're not in that, committee, you can still kind of keep abreast of what's going on. If you see something in there, please, share that with me, share that with Dr. Engel, so we can, put it on our agenda workshop or something like that and discuss it and talk about it. To Ms. Lopez's point, and I'll just use PEAMS, for example, in special ed that Mr. Bowen brought up, those are two areas that you could probably spend the year auditing, because there's so much information and so much. I think having that context, the historical data, from when those audits were performed, whether that was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, to now, and I'll use special ed as a prime example. The identification process changed over the past couple of years. So, and I see Dr. Staley in the audience. I think that number now is 5,700, 5,400, students, whereas, and I'm just using this as an example, please don't hold me to this, might have been 4,800, 5 years ago or
Oh, okay.
3 or 4 years ago.
1 year.
1 year ago.
1 year.
So,
Yes.
so there you go.
So one question is, why did the number rise?
Well, that's because the state kind of, I guess, changed the identification process, if I'm
Yeah, those are the kinds of
if I'm
things I
saying
would
that
look for.
correctly. So those are the type of things that, are gonna compare, and then, okay, is this an anomaly, is this a, so I'm cognizant to that. I think the question I had was looking at, the risk scores, and looking at some of the areas, like there's business services, there's technology, there's, finance, et cetera. If there was any way to find out when audits in those departments were done, I guess, I think that would be valuable information to make sure that we've touched on some
Yes.
of these areas and some of these
I have.
subjects in a while. Okay.
I did that when I prepared this.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
visual and performing arts was done in 2014, but it was a different scope.
Gotcha.
So I did do that.
Fantastic.
We
Fantastic.
do have that information in the Friday packet. We have the last audits for the last 5 years. So I don't know that we have dates on those. We'll make sure that we get the dates
I
of
can
those,
put
and we can absolutely provide that.
Okay.
Yes. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Cottrell?
Yes. So thank you for making the drive from Cypher every day. Some of us were just out there at Region 4, and
Yeah.
it's a headache, so thank you for that. So a couple of things, and I'll start with Trustee Bowen's early comments. And I think what I'm thinking the same thing is expounding on the findings is what will help us. It's one thing to say I found this, but go into detail.
Oh, definitely.
And I think that's kind of where he's going with his comments, because I think that's where I'm at as well when he was speaking, is just making sure to really go to the lengths to detail out those findings.
I'll be as
Yeah. And-
explicit as I can be. I will.
And then I'm excited to see the Alliance on here. I serve on their board, and by the way, Dr. Baird just won the Crystal Ball, Dancing with the Stars.
Congratulations. Yeah. Congratulations.
I had to throw that in there with the Alliance.
Is that why he
Yeah.
likes
I was looking for the bigger ball. That's what I was looking for.
And so, yes, I'm excited to see the Alliance on here, not just for Robert, but for our district, because, I met with their chairman of the board last week, and they're such an important service to the district. But what I was talking to him about in our meeting last week was making sure the Alliance follows to their mission. And I know you mentioned students for, doing the audits. Take consideration to the mission of that organization, because the word community is part of their mission. And what I would like, and hopefully everybody can get from you, is that component of the Alliance. and how well it touches the community, because, you know, they do great things. They're great fundraisers. They get a lot of grants, but it'll be exciting.
But what are the deliverables, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It'll be exciting to see what you get from that. So.
Gotcha.
With that, and I know you allocated the 5 weeks to special requests, and I think that's kind of where they were going with some of those kind of as-needed things that come up for the board and superintendent.
Yes, either that, or it may not take, it depends on how I scope it. If, I'm not gonna do a big scope. I kind of did that with transportation, learned a lesson. It depends on how big the scope is.
Mhm.
I may need 5 weeks, I may not. I may have extra time for a project that you want done. And
Well-
yeah, the special projects is part of
It
that.
kind of falls under that umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
So a question of curiosity. Safety has been a big topic of our conversations, mostly since Uvalde recently. Have you worked closely with Mr. Palazzi with doing any safety audits in your department?
We haven't done safety audits, but what we just did, well, he shared the safety documents with me just recently. I have to go through them. But we did a booster club training for 2 days, and he spoke about safety and volunteering. And I know we're going to be working a little closer on that. By the way, the booster clubs, 104 so far with their audit packets, have raised $1.2 million for the kids. They're very important to me. And more audit packets are coming, but I thought you should know the impact that they're having. But yes, Mr. Palazzi and I will be working together.
And he and Mr. Miller, I know that they've been all over safety, but I was just wondering if there was any other kind of oversight to an actual audit being performed or presented. I know that y'all have presented findings as, you know, we've gone through the summer and everything, getting ready for the school year, but I know safety is not on your list. But
It
maybe
was
that-
done last year.
Right, but
I'll look at
going
it.
forward, as we've invested a lot of time and resources and conversation into safety, that may be something to consider, that we may consider for that special request in the future, is that safety audit.
Okay. Done.
Mr. Bowen?
Yeah, and maybe just a comment. From my understanding of auditing, the more we ask, the harder it is. Like, an ideal audit is looking into one very specific element that is bounded and can really be dug into deeply, because that's where we're going to find basically any mistakes or inconsistencies, like the issue at Weber. And so the more we ask you to do, the less of a chance that you're going to be able to go in deep and find those things. And so I really do like that in some of these areas, like in visual and performing arts, we're not asking for a top to bottom audit of the entire department. It's just the specific issue that you feel is high risk.
Exactly.
And so when we think about something like safety, if there's something in particular we're concerned about, then that comes up during the year, then that's something we could ask for an audit for. But that's most likely to be successful if we're very precise about what it is that we ask for. So, for instance, when the safety department did their audit over the summer of door alarms, they were not looking at all of safety. They were looking at that one specific thing. And so, I mean, is that kind of, do you agree with that philosophically?
Yes. Are you also looking at things like drills on what to do with a school shooting? I hate to bring it up, but
Yeah.
we might as well bring it up anyway. Audits like that too? Are you looking that kind of safety? You want to know what the
Well-
protocols might be in place?
I'll just chime in. The doors is a perfect example, you know, and so we can know how many doors we have in the district. Of those doors, what percentage, and I know we had some rough numbers, you know, turn out 98, 99% of the doors, you know, had sensors, or maybe there was only, maybe it was 99.5, but there was that's a very specific item to be audited and to have specific numbers on. I think that's,
One way in, one way out,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Ms. Checker or Mr. Larson? Any comment or question?
I don't think I have anything to add to all that.
Okay. All right. Any further comment or question? Seeing no comment or question, I'll call for a motion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Bowen?
I move that we approve the auditor's recommended 2022 to 2023 internal audit report.
All right, thank you for that motion, Mr. Bowen. Do I have a second? I saw Ms. Checker. Thank you, Ms. Checker, for that second. And seeing no further comment, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your right hand. And that passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Lopez, for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you for your time.
And next, we will move on to item 5, information and discussion on our 2022 advanced placement performance.
All right. We're so glad to be here today to share a little bit about our AP scores and some comparative data. But before that, I wanted to introduce Stanley Zavala, who most of you probably know, but in case you haven't had a chance to meet, we're super excited that Stanley joined our team in July as our Director of Advanced Academics at GT Programming, moving over from LCI as a principal. And so he's brought a wealth of new insight and perspective for sure. But also we've had an opportunity even the last month or two to connect with our case group and connect with GT teachers and begin to build all those relationships. So I just want to give a little plug for Mr. Zavala before we get started. We're going to share in this presentation today. So our goal today is to share a little bit about the scores for 2022, as well as comparatively looking at the scores for CCISD, the state, and US. We see some trends in the data. I'm sure you will too. We'll try to note those as we go through the presentation. And just a reminder also, this is College Board data. So not all of the students who take the coursework actually take the exam, as we know. And so this is actually College Board data and is not taken out of our system. This is from their system. So we'll start by looking at English, and you'll see a pattern here of looking at our trends, CCISD trends, over the last 5 years or so, and then we'll look at our trends this year compared to the state and US. So that'll be how this presentation sort of goes. This is English is one of our largest student group testers for the Lang test, which is that first one, language and composition. We had over 700 testers, and for the lit, we had almost 700, I think, for Lang, and then over 300 for lit. You see a fairly large jump in our lit scores this year, and we're going to attribute that to some choice in our students and allowing them, as our mission states, giving them some personalized learning opportunities. And often what that looks like in English is them getting to choose their books, what they're reading and what they're writing about. So there's relevance and interest for them. And so we hope to continue to see some increases in that over time. You can see compared to the state and the US that we are leading that and are happy with that work and continue. Obviously, it's always a work in progress, but we see we're making strides in that area. For math, we see sort of across the board some movement in calculus and ups and downs a little bit, and we see sort of a positive growth though. For statistics, we see a little trend in a direction that we need to maybe work on and address, a slight dip in statistics. Overall, you can see that in calculus we are leading the state and the US for those areas, but in statistics, again, we have some work to do in that area.
All right. Good evening or afternoon. So for our science scores, if you look over the trend, you'll notice a few things. First of all, I'd like to highlight, though, the biology is also one of our larger testing groups as far as number of students actually testing, and we have seen an increase in biology, which is pretty awesome with all those students taking it. In Physics 1 and 2, we're pretty comparable, and you'll see on the next slide to the state and to the country. If you look at that next slide, it goes into, yes, our Physics 1 scores, you notice were a little bit lower as far as the mean score. However, we're very comparable to the U.S. and to the state when it comes to that. We still are above the state in that area. All right, for social studies, in macroeconomics, you'll notice that number's a little lower, but so is, just like I said with the other one, that's the same way in the U.S. as well. It's not above a 3 for the mean score. You can see that psychology is very consistent, and we've had an increase in human geo with over 600 students taking that exam. That's another one of our very large exams. If you notice on our comparison chart that psychology and human geo are comfortably above the state and U.S. averages, which is always nice to see. Looking at the fine arts exams, just the caveat to this one, all of these exams, I've been talking about large amount of students taking it. This has a small amount of students taking these exams. The most for any of these exams is 26 students taking it, all the way down to only 4 students taking an exam. So with that in mind, though, however, we still performed well when compared to the state and to the U.S. in all of those different areas. And for some of those tests for fine arts, those classes aren't offered every single year. They are cyclical. For example, music theory is offered every other year to have enough students who are interested for that class to make. For world language and cultures, we have not a lot of kids taking this as well. We have no test had more than 80 students take, all the way down to just around 5 students taking a test. So that's why you see, with the fewer number of students, obviously, that can quickly have an impact on those numbers, and why we see some of the fluctuations that we see within those. If you'll notice on this one, French is lower. However, we had fewer than 5 students actually take that test. So that deviation can happen very quickly between those. And then for our electives, we had an increase in all of these, or at least one, I believe, stayed the same for computer science principles, but all the rest did increase. And we had a substantial increase in the capstone research exam. And I believe this is due to the collaboration and great work of our capstone teachers across the district. And that also includes our seminar teachers. So for capstone, the students have to take seminar before they take research. And then those are just independent driven courses with skills for research, argument, and communication. So it's good to see that our students are performing well. And once again, in all areas in our electives, we scored above the state and the U.S. average.
So this,
Oh,
too quickly. Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, we probably both did,
Yeah.
sorry. So this final slide gives us an overview of, here we go, gives us an overview of our scores over the last 5 years. So we could see the increase in in the 4s and the 5s, and the decrease in the 1s and 2s. So we see some positive movement in the direction of our goal always is for a student to have a passing score, which is typically a 3, 4, or 5. And so, so we see some growth in those areas. We also know, although we see positive trends, when we dig into the data much deeper, and there's a vast amount of data from College Board, campus-specific, even teacher-specific, and we work with the campuses and get down in the nitty-gritty details to know where we need to target our work and continue our conversations in professional learning. So that's our overview for today. Do you have questions for us?
I'll open it up to the board. Mr. Bone?
Sure. I had a couple questions. The first one, I kind of want to understand Physics 1, 2, and C a little bit better. How many people actually take the Physics 1 exam? Isn't it a pretty small number?
So our Physics 1 this year, the number of students who took the exam was 426.
Okay.
Now, we do see a sharp decrease after that for physics this year. Physics 2 had 52 students take the exam, and Physics C, electricity and magnetism had 40, and mechanics had 41.
So what is the typical progression there? Like if you were a student who wants to take 2 years of physics in high school, how does that typically, when do you take it? Are those 3 different years? Like there's a 1 year, a 2 year, and then a C year that's split into the 2 subjects?
Yeah, the C is split into one, each or a semester.
Okay.
Semester. And the Physics 1 and 2 are algebra-based courses. The Physics Cs, both of them, which are one semester each, are calculus-based courses.
Okay. Is that a recent change?
There was some restructuring of those courses, yes. I want to say maybe 2018 or 19. It's been a few years now.
About 5 years ago.
Okay.
5 years ago. Okay, it was.
Okay,
yes.
so Physics B went away and was replaced by 1 and 2?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And so why is the Physics 1 score so low? I mean, I guess, do most students take Physics 1 and then that's their last year of physics and they don't go on to 2 and C?
Often, yes, that's
Okay.
correct, because that is one of the options they have for a science credit that's an advanced course. And unless you are pretty passionate about physics, it goes from 400 something to just 50 or 40. So there are much fewer kids in the advanced or the multiple layers of the physics.
Okay. Yeah, I guess could you speak a little to why? I mean, that's the one that jumps out at me as us being well below average, and I know we seem to perform about equally with the country, better than the state.
Yeah.
But why do you think that is? Why do we seem like we're struggling so much in that subject specifically?
Yeah, I wish I had a great answer. I don't know if you have. Yeah.
I would say there's lots of variables that would play into that.
There are. It's very inquiry-based. It's a very inquiry-based course. It has been a focus of our professional learning for quite a while, but it also is deep with algebra understanding, and although Algebra 1 is a prerequisite, there is Algebra 2 involved in that. So I think sometimes students who aren't either concurrently taking Algebra 2 or have previously taken it, that makes it more challenging as well, just understanding the math content. I think there are multiple layers, just like Mr. Zavala said. So
Once the College Board changed the exam, the scores plummeted across the U.S. and the state, which is why you see that comparison. So we're still at where the U.S. is in Physics 1, but those scores are much lower. The math in the physics exam is algebra-based, but what algebra-based is it's more Algebra 2-based, not Algebra 1. And students go into Physics 1 saying it's not calculus, so it should be ready. But if they're concurrently taking Algebra 2, that means they're learning Algebra 2 at the same time and haven't mastered Algebra 2. And so it's really a much more difficult AP exam than probably what it was even before.
Can I add something as a former high school principal? And science teacher.
Please
and
do.
Very guidance. So I think what I noticed too, there was a lot of concern, especially in the science department, when they took away like that regular physics and it was just physics 1. And in our community, we have a lot of kids that are gonna maybe go to college under a Bachelor of Arts, but we're going to encourage our kids as parents to take, because you take biology, chemistry, physics, like that's kind of what we do. And so we probably have, and I'm just guessing, and just my observations as a principal, but we have a really high number of kids who take physics 1. And they're not all necessarily advanced placement type kids. That might be one of the few tests that they take. But I think because we have such a high number that take it because of our community, the score might be a little lower, but then that just also informs us of, okay, where can we improve and where can we get better? But we do have a lot of kids that go to college and a lot of parents want their kids to have that physics when they're going to college.
And so maybe kind of another question on that is when you look at the actual credit that's granted by the colleges for these different physics tests, is there really an advantage to taking physics 1 versus if you pass physics 2 and skip physics 1, then do you get all of the credit you would have gotten anyway?
So that's dependent on which colleges you're going to. And most of our kids that are taking physics 2 and then matriculating to college are science majors. So I can tell you that a lot of the colleges aren't even going to, they have to accept the score because the state of Texas passed that law, but then they're gonna create a different class, like a physics for chemistry majors or a physics for physics majors. So they would get maybe an elective credit, but it's not really gonna change what they're taking in college.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm kind of getting at with all of this is maybe we need to seriously revisit the progression here to create some kind of physics option that is advanced, but maybe isn't specifically intended for people who want to take the AP tests and keep going. And then maybe when you go, if you want to continue with that progression, physics 2 is where it actually becomes an AP class that you're encouraged to take the test for, and then if you want to take even more, you have the physics C options. I mean, maybe that would serve more students, and that way you're not overloading the students who really aren't intending to go deeply into sciences, but at the same time, we have a stronger progression for the ones who do.
Kind of like how we used to, where we did
Yes.
physics and pre-AP physics, and then your AP physics, which was.
Right, you would go pre-AP Physics, then AP Physics B, and then AP Physics C. Yeah. So.
And we could look at some of those options.
Yeah, I have a question. I guess I don't understand the advantage of allowing somebody to take physics without having the Algebra 2 background. Is there a reason for that? Are we required to do that or something?
Are we required to allow them to take it?
Yes.
Yes.
So typically, College Board identifies what are appropriate prerequisites for the class, and College Board has identified Algebra 1 as the prerequisite for this course. In actuality, it would be much more beneficial for students to experience success if Algebra 2 was a requirement. Now, we are prerequisite, and currently we haven't veered from what they recommend. If they whatever they recommend is what is usually in our EPG, our course guide. So that's a conversation we can have, and we can certainly increase the prerequisite expectation. We obviously wouldn't want to decrease it, but that's one of that's been, it seems to be misaligned. Usually the recommendations from College Board are pretty okay. They're aligned with what we would believe also, but this is one where the alignment is a little off.
Do we have any data on how well students who have not had Algebra 2 do versus those who do, and also maybe data on students that are taking Algebra 2 alongside the class? I mean,
Definitely.
I might shed some light on that.
Yeah, I don't know that dead offhand, but I'm sure we could find that, and that would be
Okay.
interesting to know.
Yeah, the other interesting thing when you look at this graph is for all the other science subjects, Texas runs just a tiny bit below the US, maybe 0.2 points or something like that. And then in Physics 1, you've got this massive divergence. And so I wonder if this isn't a problem the state has created with a lot of their recent changes. And when I say recent, I mean after I graduated, so since 2008. But with the changes that have been made to some of these course progressions, maybe the state has accidentally misaligned our algebra pathway and our science pathway, and so now we're, without meaning to, sending a lot of kids into this physics course without having had the math background that is necessary, and probably geometry as well, that's necessary for them to succeed. So I don't know. I mean, this is something that'll take a lot more study for sure, but I'd kind of like more information at some point about what specifically is it that's being covered in Algebra 2 that is not covered in Algebra 1 that is lacking for students who are going into Physics 1. Like what are the concepts that are missing when they go into that? And then maybe that'll point us toward a better solution.
Okay, and I can do some research on that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Sanchez?
I was curious, and I'm trying to remember if I'm confusing advanced placement with possibly a different topic that we've discussed in the past. But in addition to the scores, has there also been a time where we've looked at the numbers of test takers? I know you mentioned a few numbers throughout, but the chance to see how our numbers are changing over the course of each of these years in each of the subject areas. And then I think even if we looked a layer deeper, and I think we've done this before, is understanding the different groups, different student groups that are taking this. And we've looked at it, I think, by ethnicity as we were trying to see increases of our students that are taking the test and ultimately how they're performing. That's a lot more information than what's here, but I think maybe building on what Mr. Bowen was saying is it would be helpful for us to know, especially coming off of 2 years that weren't really normal for all of our students, and just understanding how that's affected our students, especially those that may have taken advanced placement less often, and ultimately seeing where we are so that we have a good sense of where we're going and how our students are performing. Despite changes in how the courses are being offered, I think it's still something that would be helpful for us to follow.
Absolutely, and we can share some of that too. We have that
can do
data.
that.
Yeah.
And going back to what we had a program review, maybe, we've looked at those numbers
We have.
before.
Okay.
And so we can certainly go back and look at that.
And over the course of the last several years, I mean, we have had that as a priority, a superintendent target, even to increase the number of enrollees and people who take the test. And we also, don't forget, have a program evaluation for AP coming up this year. So we'll have some deeper data shared during that time when that review, I believe, is mid-year. Yes. Okay. So we'll have a lot more details to share then, for sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Bowen, to your comment, I went to look at the formula sheet even for the Physics 1 exam, and there's a lot of trigonometry in it. Trig's not taught in Algebra 1, not to this level. And then the formulas, if you think about Algebra 1, where students are learning about slope or quadratic equations, the formula chart in itself has complex formulas that are a lot more advanced than just Algebra 1.
Yeah, and I figured that was probably a big part of it. I mean, you can't even really do physics without trigonometry.
Right.
So yeah, I would be interested to know if there's a way we can harmonize those progressions so that we're setting as many students up for success as we can, and not, because I would hate to be a student who has to take physics sophomore year in order to make their schedule work, which I think is where we're expecting most of these to land, is you do Physics 1 sophomore year, Physics 2 junior year, and then Physics C, both sides of it senior year. And so if you're in Physics 1 sophomore year, then maybe you would have had Algebra 1 by then. You wouldn't have had geometry, and or you might, unless you took something early.
Yeah.
And so the
Probably
best case
concurrent.
scenario for a lot of students is
Many are
that-
probably concurrently in Algebra 2.
Yeah, and so I don't know, there probably needs to be a better way of doing that.
Any more questions? Mr. Gold?
I did have one on a completely different subject, for English literature. When we look at students having a choice of what they can read for that class, are they limited to books that have been covered in previous AP literature? Like, is there some sort of list they're choosing from, or is it pretty much anything goes?
It could be anything at certain times, but there are recommended texts, which is a very long, expansive list, and so most of our classroom libraries that we purchased in the last several years for those classes include lots of those books. So, but students have many times have an opportunity to just read a book that they're interested in. So that habit of reading is important for just becoming a better reader and analyzer of what you're reading. So.
Okay.
Anyone else? Stanley, wanted to welcome you in your new role, and it's good to see you. And I guess without anything further, I will adjourn us at 5:35.